Good evening. We were discussing before you joined that I'd like San Pellegrino to be a sponsor of this show. So if you have any connections there, please be in touch. Thank you for being part of the two-way community. This is Two-Way Tonight. I am your humble host, Mark Halperin. We're going to run through the day's news. Two great guests. We often have two great guests. We have it again. Our streak remains unbroken. And then we'd like your participation. We had three new folks this morning on the morning meeting. I'd love it again. I'd love again, three folks never raised your hand before. Please raise your hand. Be part of the conversation when we get to you. That's the way this thing works. We talk for a while, then you talk. Conversations like no other with peace, love, and understanding, and an attempt to bring all voices around America, around the world, even the galaxy, if possible, to have the conversations we should be having and for whatever reason aren't happening elsewhere. So thank you for being part of this. Our guests will be here in a moment. Lyndsay Keith, Kaivan Shroff, both of whom have been here before and both of whom are fantastic guests in general, but I'm curious what they think about a bunch of stuff that's in the news. So they'll be here in a moment. The two biggest stories today are the stories that were the biggest stories yesterday, and I suspect will be the biggest stories all week. One is the looming summit on Friday in Alaska. President Trump's going to fly out Friday morning, according to Caroline Levit. So that summit's not going to take place till afternoon East Coast time, and who knows how long it will be. Caroline also said she didn't know what would happen after the meeting and whether there'd be a joint press conference or some sort of readout from the president. We shall see. Anyway, Caroline briefed at 1 today, and I'd say most of the news was made today that I saw and I know about was made by Caroline herself in response to reporter questions. So we'll get to that. And then the other big story is the ongoing integration of federal agencies into law enforcement on the streets of Washington, D.C., and the policy and political debates around that. And I got to tell you, I have mixed feelings about that story and talking about it here because, and I'm sorry, my eyes are just tearing up for some reason. Anyway, those of you listening to us and not watching will wonder why it is. I'm pausing. It's because my eyes are killing me. In any event, why do I have mixed feelings about talking about that story? There's crime in the streets of DC, and everyone I know who lives in DC, everyone, literally, and I know a lot of people. I grew up there. I used to work there. I cover Washington, although I don't live there. Everyone I know there will tell you the same thing, which is they don't really care about the crime statistics. If they live in literally any neighborhood in the District of Columbia, no, is it 90 square miles? Is that what it is? There's danger on the streets, and I mean, my family lives there. My dad lives in a very upscale neighborhood, and it's scary as hell what happens in his neighborhood. And everybody has those doorbell cameras now, and everybody I know, almost everybody, that's an exaggeration. It's not exaggeration to say everybody I know feels that there's too much crime on the streets of DC and it's unsafe, and they've been robbed and carjacked and seen shootings in the neighborhood. Lots of people I know, try not to be hyperbolic, have captured crimes on their doorbell cameras. I mean, it just shouldn't be. And so anyway, there's crime. And so I don't like the debate about whether, DC is a dangerous city. Trust me, DC is a dangerous city. So I don't like that. I don't really like the debate about, I shouldn't say I don't like. We're not going to settle the constitutional issue. We'll see if the courts get involved here. We'll see how it goes. And I get the concern, some of it political, some of it substantive, that, it's unusual and unprecedented in some ways what's happening, to have the president of the United States using the military, the National Guard, law enforcement, federal law enforcement to try to police the streets of Washington. But the mayor, who talked again today, I think is probably in a little bit of a bind, because on the one hand, she's a Democrat in a Democratic city that doesn't like anything Donald Trump does. On the other hand, I mean, here's some more resources, and you can talk about how bad the DMV is in Maryland, the Motor Vehicle Department. You can talk about how poor the roads are maintained, how bad the schools are. There's a lot of things to criticize about the DC government. True about most American cities, by the way. But crime and violence on the streets, right? Job one for any government: keep the people safe. allow businesses and families to go about their business and live their lives without fear of being robbed or killed. So for me, all these issues about, is Trump going to try to do this in other cities, or is he doing this to distract from Jeffrey Epstein, or on the other side, is he doing it because he really cares? I mean, I'm not uninterested in those things, but all I really care about is, can government work here? And again, I'm encouraged by the mayor. There was a meeting today between the mayor and a lot of senior federal officials. Can they make this work? Because I can tell you this, the mayor of DC, and she seems like, compared to the last 10 mayors of DC, she seems to be one of the more competent people who've had the job. But I can tell you this, with no reservation or fear of being contradicted, she was not on track to control crime in her city. She's just not. So, and again, this is why a lot of the discussion around this story doesn't interest me that much. What I really care about, as someone who, as I said, grew up in the area, has family there, a lot of people I care about live there. I just want to see whether the feds and the DC government working together can actually make a difference. And by the way, if they did, if I were the mayor of another city, even a Democratic mayor, I'd say, yeah, let's try that model here. And so little of the discussion is about that. And my colleagues in the media, they want to say this is inappropriate. This is Trump trying to change the subject. This is Trump violating norms. This is Trump trying to take over a Democratic city. This is Trump playing the race card. I'm not saying that none of that's true. I'm really not. Some of it, I'm sure, is, not all of it. But so little of the discussion is about the one thing that I think matters. I want kids and families and business owners in Washington, D.C. to see whether this works. I mean, I see in the chat, I never read it, but I do glance at it. Authoritarianism. Yeah, sure. I get that theme. And I'm not indifferent to it at all. As a journalist, as a citizen, I get the constitutional and pure power implications of this, but I don't really care about them. I'm just being honest. All I want is our focus to say, can this be done, and can it be done well, right? So it's one thing to say we're going to put guard and active military and federal law enforcement on the streets. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to coordinate it. And I watch a lot of coverage and I read a lot of coverage. I'd like the coverage to be about holding them accountable to doing it well, because guess what? They're doing it. Caroline Levit today said they're going to do it for the 30 days. And then evaluate. Now, I keep meaning to do this, and maybe somebody on here will know the answer. The law says, again, the home rule law doesn't apply to any other city. They can do it for 30 days. Well, can they stop for a day and then do another 30? I don't know, right? Like, is it lifetime 30? How long do you have to wait before you do another 30? I'm curious about that. Because if it's working, sure, take a day off and then go right back to doing it. In any event, we're going to talk about that with our guests. We're going to look at what Caroline said, what the mayor said, what the U.S. attorney, who happens to be Judge Janine, said. And then we'll probably do that first, since I've talked so much about it. And then we'll talk more about the Alaska summit and what the expectations are for that. Probably, I would say, for me, the lead of what Caroline said about the meeting, besides what I already mentioned, which is the logistics are still being worked out in terms of whether it'll be a press conference. She didn't rule out a joint press conference. Is that the president doesn't intend to present a plan. He intends to listen. So that the point of this is not for Trump to say, here's what the Europeans and Zelensky and I think we should do. The point is for the president to say to Putin, what are you proposing? And I didn't say she ruled out Zelensky coming at the last minute, and could happen. But she, if you took her literally, made it pretty clear. There's no Zelensky here. This is Trump hearing Putin's ideas about what to do, what he wants to do. And so, as I said this morning on the morning meeting, I think it could be a 2-minute conversation. I could easily imagine Putin coming in and saying, I want everything, and I want all the land I've taken and more, and they can't be in the EU. Ukraine can't be in the EU or NATO, and and asking for a bunch of other stuff, and Trump saying, well, is there any give on that? And he's no. That could be it. Long way to go for a 5-minute meeting. So we'll see. Some stuff on the economy today. Scott Bessent was on Fox Business and talked a bit. the new head of the BLS, Commissioner of Bureau of Labor Statistics, he's made comments suggesting he wants to at least suspend the monthly reports that BLS puts out. Caroline, on the other hand, when asked about this, said something artful like her expectation is that the data will continue. Now, look, if they can make the data more respected and consistent and not have to be revised every month, great. But you take that with the fact that there's reports that the administration sent a letter to the Smithsonian saying we want to be more involved in your exhibits. And we're back to a lot of people very concerned about the president's and the administration's violating of norms and norms that in some cases matter. So we'll talk about all that. Again, would love to get 3 new folks in. So if you've never been on the program before, please raise your hand. If you've been on before, but you've got something you want to say or ask, please also raise your hand. Hold on, I'm looking at a text from, I'll tell you, one of my best sources. Let's see what they say. Nah, not important. Something I need to follow up on, but not important for us. All right, so we'll bring in our guests and we'll talk to them about some of the news. We'll look at some sound bites and then take your questions. And our first returning champion and guest, Lyndsay Keith. Lyndsay, welcome in. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be back with you.
Lyndsay used to host a show with Sean Spicer. That's one thing she's done. Lyndsay, for people who've never seen you before and don't have the good fortune of having followed you on social media, tell everybody sort of what your career arc has been and what you're doing now.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I had an Inside Politics show with Sean on Newsmax for quite a bit. Really enjoyed that. And now I cover the White House and politics as an independent journalist. So I've been in the briefing room many times. I wasn't today. I'm traveling. But yeah, I cover politics and the White House extensively. And I've been friends with Mark. He used to come on my show with Sean all the time. And then I've also been in politics and tech and marketing. So I've dabbled a lot of things. And actually sports journalism is where I started my original career. Never thought I would be in broadcasting, but that kind of got my feet wet there and really enjoyed it. So, and it's always an honor to be on your show, Mark. And actually I was on with your next guest. I won't steal your thunder introducing him. So it's fun to be back on together.
Yeah, it's good to have you back together. Just one more for you, Lindsay, and then we'll bring Kaivan in. When you were a sports reporter, you were occasionally a sideline reporter, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yep, I was a sideline reporter.
So here's the thing I wonder, like if you watch a 3-hour football game, they go the sideline reporter 4 times, right? Like what is a sideline reporter doing for the other 2 hours and 55 minutes during the game?
You just kick your feet up, no, you're actually running up and down the sideline. It's kind of sad. They don't utilize the sideline reporter enough sometimes. Because you're really supposed to be close to the team, listening, hearing, trying to get some insight, maybe actually from trainers, things like that, if there's a player that's hurt and so forth. A lot of the work that you do is before the game or after the game, talking to coaches, talking to players, and then you're kind of trying to give color commentary specifically. And then obviously the halftime is your big moment to interview the coach or after a player. But really, you're having to watch the entire game and just be ready for any moment where something big would happen where you'd be called on. So even though they don't utilize you a lot, it's a lot of work for not a lot of airtime.
Yeah.
But I had fun. I enjoyed it.
And how do you sell stuff to the control room? Like, how do you tell them you got something? You text them?
Yeah, you tell them. Yeah. So they're always listening to you. They always have you on. One of the craziest things I will say that I think was helpful for my career now, being at rallies or things like that, you're in this huge raucous stadium. You have your IFB in. And you, like, the producer may be talking to you, can barely hear them because people are just screaming, shouting behind you, plus the game itself. So trying to hone in on that while you're talking can be a lot of work. But yeah, you just talk into your microphone. It's always on. They can always hear you speak in a conversation.
But of course, they may be doing something else. I'll tell you what it's almost exactly like, and I hadn't thought about it till just now, is being a floor correspondent at a political convention.
Yeah, exactly. Right? That's what I'm saying. It really helped me with that because you have to be able to have hone in your ear to hear multiple people talking to you while you're talking, and it's so loud in a room. So
and if you're on the floor of the convention, experience. You're in this crowded area. The sidelines is probably cushy compared to that, and you're trying to sell stuff, and it's like you don't know what they have on the air because you're doing your own thing, and you say to them, "Oh my God, I've got Bob Dole here." Like that happened to me at the convention, the Republican convention in 2012.
I was there.
I fought my way over to Bob Dole, and I was like, I can interview Bob Dole. I was like, Senator Dole, can I interview? Yes. And I tell the control room, and they're like, we don't care. Like, we got something else on the air. So very similar
for them.
Very similar. Yeah,
So
I mean,
Mark's
that's
the
one
best.
example. And then someday I'll tell you my best convention coverage story, but not tonight. Lindsay, thank you for being here. Kaivan, welcome back. Thank you for being here. You are an attorney and a nonprofit activist. What do those two things mean?
Yeah, so I'm an advisor actually at a nonprofit in DC, 30-year-old nonprofit focused on bipartisanship. So we partner with current and past administration folks and the business community to foster dialogues. And then I'm also a public interest attorney. I worked at Everytown for gun safety and have done various pro bono legal things in New York City, where I'm based. And it's great to be back on with both of you. Yeah. Hearing Mark's story is making me laugh because I was a delegate last year for Kamala Harris, and I remember walking around that convention floor, covering my mouth to not lose a tooth, with all the journalists and creators running around with their cameras, swinging. So I definitely know the buzz you were talking about.
Wow.
Sorry, now I am getting something interesting, which I'll share with my team here. My colleagues will tell me what they think of this thing I'm sending them, and tell me whether you think we should put this right on the air. In any event, while we do that, when you guys have been on before, did you get any feedback for being on two-way? Anybody see you on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did. A lot of people followed me and reached out to me. So thank you for those of you who are on. It was great, Mark. Really good feedback.
Okay, good. Kaivan, no feedback.
Not a ton on social media, but I did. I've been ramping up my own YouTube, so I saw all the views and comments there, and great to see the discussion continues afterwards.
All right, excellent. Well, again, thank you both for being here. Let's talk about this DC thing, and let's run through some stuff. Here is the head of the DEA. That's one of the federal agencies who's now involved. And Caroline Levit ran through at the briefing today. This is number one, Sam. Ran through at the briefing today a litany of some of the types of alleged crimes committed by alleged criminals who they helped pick up off the streets of DC. Here's the DEA chief, number one, please.
It's not safe. People do not feel safe. The amount of citizens that have come up to me on the street and said, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for taking on another responsibility. We appreciate the federal agents that are out there every single night. And now, starting tonight, we will be embedded with the Metropolitan Police Department. You will see federal agents working hand in hand on patrol with the Metropolitan Police Department. You will also see an increase of activity, patrol activity, in certain sectors to go after the violent criminal offenders that are the drivers of this crime. We cannot afford to turn a blind eye, Martha.
All right. Now, here is the U.S. Attorney for the Washington, D.C. area, Jeanine Pirro, talking about taking issue with those who say crime stats suggest crime is down in D.C. This is number two, please.
Anyone who wants to tell me the crime is down and that we don't need an emergency focus on crimes of violence, all they need to do is take a look at this and talk to the loved ones and the family members of these individuals, all shot and killed long before their time.
Okay, so again, this is happening, folks. Like, this is not a debate about whether the president's going to do this. They're on the streets, and it's not a debate. What the U.S. attorney there said is true. There's a crime problem in the nation's capital, as there is in many cities. Now, as I said, my concern is, can they do this well? Here is the mayor of D.C. and the police chief talking about the chain of command, because obviously this is complicated. You got the existing D.C. police, and then you've got all these new federal agents coming in of various kinds from various parts of the federal government. Here's the D.C. mayor and the police chief, number four.
The chain of command is now?
What does that mean?
Well, is it Pam Bondi speaking to the mayor, speaking to you, or how does this work?
So the executive order is clear. The president has requested MPD services, and our home rule charter outlines the process. The president designated Attorney General Bondi as his proxy to request service.
All right, I thought that went on a little longer. And in any event, understandably, they're all figuring this out. But they had a meeting today, and she came out of it. And just as she said yesterday, she expressed some concerns, but she also said, we're grateful for the help. One of the questions that's come up, remember, the president has said, and Sean has fleshed this out, he's concerned about crime, but he's also concerned about this homelessness problem and the homeless 10 cities on the street. So here's Caroline talking about how they plan to address with federal force the homelessness issue, and particularly the 10 cities. This is number 3, please.
Metropolitan Police Department, with the support of the new federal agencies who have been surging on the streets of the District of Columbia, are going to enforce the laws that are already on the books here in Washington, D.C. For far too long, these laws have been completely ignored, and the homelessness problem has ravaged the city. So D.C. Code 22-1307 and D.C. Municipal Regulation 24-100 give the Metropolitan Police Department the authority to take action when it comes to homeless encampments. So homeless individuals will be given the option to leave their encampment, to be taken to a homeless shelter, to be offered addiction or mental health services, and if they refuse, they will be susceptible to fines or to jail time. Again, these are pre-existing laws that are already on the books. They have not been enforced, which is part of the reason for this federalizing of the National Guard to bring in this assistance for law enforcement. While we are targeting criminals and trying to remove criminals off of the streets, we also want to make DC safe and beautiful, and that involves removing mentally disturbed individuals and homeless encampments as well. So we will be using these regulations and code that already exists to clean up our streets.
So the president has said in the past he wants to move the homeless out of D.C., and Caroline was asked about that too, and she said, we'll see. And not a lot of clarity. So Lindsay, what are your big unanswered questions about this operation?
Yeah, I think, it's something that you said in your open, Mark, is how long will this actually go on, and will the administration adhere to the 30-day mark? Will they try to ensue Congress to try to do something on their part? And then also ultimately how they have put a plan out how the National Guard is going to be used, but what will that response be? And then I think one of the big questions, I actually live in Washington, D.C., and I've experienced this myself. When I first moved back to the city in January, I'd been away for a few years. I actually didn't get the apartment that I really wanted because I went at night, and where I would park my car, there were people smoking bongs. There were actual prostitutes on the corner. And, I was like, I literally have to say no. I was about to sign the lease, and I was like, I have to say no because this is so dangerous. And even where I live now, I don't go out at night. A lot of the problem where I live is the juveniles who just run rampant. And so I think a big question still is, how is that going to be addressed under these laws? What does the enforcement actually look like? One thing that we've seen over the course of the last year or so is they'll come up and put big fences around where these encampments are. They'll give people warning. You have to have all your stuff out in 24 hours. If not, they'll put up a chain link fence, and then they'll actually come with a huge dumpster and throw all the stuff away, and it'll clear out for a little while, but give it a month and people are back. I think the administration so far, we saw in the press conference yesterday, really shows that this is a collective response from the administration. This wasn't some knee-jerk reaction. They've clearly been planning this for a long time. And Muriel Bowser, the mayor, has been clear that they have been working with them behind the scenes for months now to try to clean up the city in preparation for the 250th anniversary of America next year. So, I think even seeing the mayor's response, she seems very calm. I think, she's probably doing this a little bit, it's not fun for her to do. She knows that she has to do as a responsibility. But a lot of what I hear from the Democrats who are speaking out essentially is, the facts don't line up with the response that this is emergency. But I think this goes back to ultimately the election. When I would talk to voters on the ground, and I'd be in these swing states, I'd be in these key critical states, and a lot of what they were saying is, it's saying what Biden could never meet the metric on. And he was like, the economy is great. I brought inflation so far down, but the American people are saying, I don't feel that. When you talk to people who live in the district, a lot of them don't feel safe. They don't feel safe walking their dog after dark. And so it's not necessarily all about the metrics, even though they have done a better job, DC, in the last few years. It's about how are people feeling? And do you want to have all these people ascending on our nation's capital for the 250th anniversary if murders are happening, homicides, people's cars are getting jacked? And so, I do think people, when I see the Democrats' response, this is their moment to try to see what people are actually saying, opposed to what are the facts saying that it's a safer city than it was, 2 years ago, but do residents actually still feel safe? And I think that's really what matters here, that I've seen Democrats miss the moment on so far.
Yeah. Kaivan, this is the part of the program where I call you counselor. Counselor,
Oh, God.
what are your questions about this? From a legal point of view, does it make you uncomfortable? Or are you, like me, just focused on, will this help families?
Well, I do want to zoom out a little bit, because I do think we can't just say we don't care what the statistics say, and anecdotally our friends and families in DC have experienced, discomfort with the situation there. I respect that, and I do think that really matters. And I think Republicans are very good at focusing on making people feel a certain way. And it reminds me of sort of just after the pandemic, I'm in New York City, there was a lot of buzz around a few discrete subway crimes, and people felt the subway was very unsafe, and it was really sort of a cloud over the city for several years. And I think, the new NYPD commissioner has been successful in bringing crime down, but just because a feeling is pervasive doesn't mean that it aligns with the facts. And I think Democrats try to come at things from a policy perspective and look at things over a long run. So there is value in saying that we've tracked this data over time and it's getting better. Now, better may not be good enough. So I hear you on that. And DC is more violent and has more crime than major cities like New York City and Los Angeles. So I think that itself discusses, a key problem. I think, though, at the end of the day, there's clear evidence that fining the homeless isn't going to be a practical solution to the problem of homelessness, and arresting the homeless and throwing away their clothes so they can't get a job and throwing away their medication.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just to be clear, Caroline said today that the homeless will be offered drug help and drug addiction help and mental health services as well, and being offered to take to a homeless shelter. They just want them off the street. So they're not proposing to just throw them all right in prison.
Yeah. I think when you look at how those things actually work out, sometimes there's a lot of limitations on actually getting those homeless individuals into shelters, because there's so many limitations, rules, and barriers to them actually, finding that solution tenable. And obviously that's why this situation currently exists. Otherwise, they wouldn't choose to be unhoused over to be in the shelter to some extent. But I hear you on that, and hopefully it does work. I will say, of course, coming into DC, coming to Union Station, is it jarring every time in one of the greatest countries in the world to see a bunch of homeless people and a bunch of tents right when you get out? Yes. But I also think that this idea that it's not necessarily a big deal, that it's a distraction, it's not necessarily a big deal.
Leave the homeless aside, though. What about the crime?
But I guess, what's the question? Like, should there be less crime? Sure.
Well, no. Do you think if the alternatives are let the DC government with no record of success try to deal with the crime, or let's carefully monitor a federal role for supplementing what the DC government and DC police force have been able to do? Do you have a preference between those two?
I mean, I'm skeptical about the phrase "carefully monitor" because I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, so if you don't think it can be carefully monitored, and again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to frame it right.
Yeah.
So one choice is Donald Trump never raises this, and the people of DC are left to the tender mercies of the current Metropolitan Police Department, which, again, I can tell you without fear of contradiction, they're not solving the problem. They're just not, And in part, they're not because the DC government doesn't have enough money, in part because the Republicans took money away from them, but they're not solving the problem. So the question is, would you prefer to let the DC government continue to fail the people of the District of Columbia in terms of the most basic responsibility of government safety? Or would you like to see the injection of some federal muscle and see if that can solve the problem? It seems to me it's a binary choice right now, and I'm curious which you would prefer.
I think if they can collaborate productively, it's good to see the outcomes. Yes, they should bring crime down. I think that's a given. I also think, though, that there's a pointlessness to this conversation. And I know you were saying you feel there's a pointlessness to other aspects of this conversation, but the bigger picture here is that anytime something doesn't go well for this White House or this administration, they want to flex their muscles, whether it's through a military parade or sending the National Guard to LA or focusing on DC right now. These are things that could be done at any time as needed to address crime. I mean, crime happens everywhere and could be better everywhere. So when we randomly and arbitrarily pick
Well,
the
it's not random and arbitrary for
no.
three reasons. Number one, there's home rule, so the president can do more in this city than he can other places.
No,
Two,
but the timing is arbitrary.
I mean, he's
it's
been
random
talking,
and arbitrary,
he's been
but it's not
about
random because it's
Well,
directly tied to the current state of affairs for Donald Trump.
I have no indication that that's the case. He's only been president for 6 months. He sees it every time he goes out. They've been working on the plan.
He was just bragging that the metrics were so great in May and that crime was down.
Yeah. All right. Lindsay, real quick, because I want to move to one more topic, then I want to get folks in, but you go.
I do think it matters that he's been working behind the scenes with the city since he came into office, and he's been talking about this for a long time. And there have been incidents that have happened just in the last few weeks that I think draw this specifically to his attention to do something more. And so you can say maybe the specific day is arbitrary, but I don't think to showing that he had a collective response with his whole team there in the press conference and everything that they were going to do, it's not like they just pulled this out of a hat one day. It shows that it was a collective response. So maybe the day you could say, but I don't think overall that it is weird and arbitrary.
Yeah. All right. One more story, then we're going to get to your questions and comments. So please raise your hand. You ask about anything because these two can talk about anything. So Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and others in the administration have leveled a bunch of allegations related to Russiagate. And I think this is a case where the right is going to say all the things are true. There was a conspiracy to destroy Donald Trump, and the dominant media refuses to cover it because they're trying to cover up their failures, and the Democrats. That's the red point of view. The blue point of view is nothing to see here. This is all made up. They're lying. Barack Obama is innocent, etc. I try to live between those two things and just follow the facts. It's hard because the Republicans don't make it easy by overstating the case and saying things that are wrong. And the Democrats don't make it easy by being closed-minded about the whole thing. One person now at the center of a new set of allegations, put up number 6, is former Congressman, current California Senator Adam Schiff. According to documents made public by the FBI, there's a whistleblower. I'll read the headline. Adam Schiff approved intel leaks to smear Trump, thought he'd be CIA chief if Hillary Clinton won, according to a whistleblower. So according to this document, there's a whistleblower who was aligned with the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, and that Schiff leaked things with the motive of trying to become the head of the CIA if Hillary Clinton won, and with the intention of smearing Donald Trump. Now, one of my biggest complaints about the media regarding Adam Schiff is he clearly went on television and said things that weren't true about Donald Trump during Russiagate. And he claimed to have the authority of his status as a senior Democrat on the Intelligence Committee to leave the impression, well, I've seen documents that say really bad things about Donald Trump regarding Russia. And he's never been held accountable for it. And every time he went on after being caught lying, I expected even the liberal media to ask him, and they almost never did. And if they did, they dropped it right away. So this news story, if true, doesn't change the paradigm completely, because anyone paying attention knows that Adam Schiff was in favor of leaked or pretend leaks to try to hurt Donald Trump. I don't think anybody could dispute that. Here's what Caroline Levit said when she got a friendly question at the briefing about whether the press should or would cover this story, number 8.
The president has already said he wants to see Adam Schiff held accountable for the countless lies he told the American people in relation to the Russiagate scandal. I brought Tulsi Gabbard out to this podium to talk to you about all of that, and this administration is taking accountability very seriously. As for this new FBI whistleblower report, I understand Kash Patel last night declassified a 302 FBI document showing that a whistleblower who is a Democrat, a career intelligence officer who worked for Democrats on the House Intel Committee for more than a decade, repeatedly warned the FBI in 2017 that then Rep. Adam Schiff had approved leaking classified information to smear then President Donald Trump over the Russiagate scandal. This is obviously a bombshell whistleblower report. Hopefully more people in this room will cover it as such. And I have a quote from the FBI director. for all of you. He has said this: for years, certain officials used their positions to selectively leak classified information to shape political narratives. It was all done with one purpose: to weaponize intelligence and law enforcement for political gain. Those abuses eroded public trust in our institutions. The FBI will now lead the charge with our partners at DOJ, and Congress will have the chance to uncover how political power may have been weaponized and to restore accountability. That's what the administration is focused on, and hopefully we'll see some more media reports on this whistleblower allegation. If this were reversed, if this were allegations against the president or any of these cabinet officials, I'm sure everyone in this room would cover it as such.
So, Kaivan, I've not read a word about this in the Washington Post or New York Times. Maybe they're working on big bombshell investigative pieces that'll come out. But based on what you know, either before or what was just presented, does this seem like a story that should be pursued? If there really is a Democratic staffer for the Intelligence Committee who's a whistleblower saying Adam Schiff did these improper things, should the media and the Congress be looking into this?
I mean, any story, I think there's an argument if it's a true story that it should get focused. But I think once again, it's a disservice to pretend there's a civil debate happening here on whether this was a bad thing for Adam Schiff to do, when the larger context is the blatant weaponization of the DOJ against Donald Trump's political enemies, kicking up all sort of dirt about Obama and Hillary and all this stuff.
Hold on. Sorry.
Yep.
You might be right that those pieces of it are a blatant political attempt to go after the president's enemies. But that's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking you if Adam Schiff, the senior Democrat on the Intel Committee, is being accused by a whistleblower, according to the FBI, is being accused by a whistleblower of saying we should leak stuff to hurt Trump, about Trump and Russia. And I'm doing it in part because I not only want to hurt Trump, I want to become CIA director. Does that bear?
I mean, I just feel like it's the same thing. Like, this is what I'm talking about. I could say, should they investigate Brett Kavanaugh for leaking about the Clinton impeachment and go after him? That's what's being done here, though, right?
Stop changing subjects. I'm just asking you.
But that's what they're doing. That's what I'm saying. Like, sure, go report on it. It's not about changing the subject. They're trying to change the subject, and I think media is trying to do a judgment call of how far are we going to follow these sort of random stories that the Trump administration pulled out. Whether or not they have merit, it's fine. If it has merit, go write it up. Sure. I think it's valid. Produce the evidence and go run it.
Do you think, Lindsay, one more for me and then please come in. Do you think it's a random story if the senior Democrat on the Intelligence Committee was heard by someone on the committee saying we should break the law and leak classified information in order to hurt Donald Trump's chances of winning the election? Just on its own, forget every other.
But I refuse to answer on its own because it's not happening in a vacuum. So yes, objectively, do I think that's a bad thing that merits further investigation if true and if evidence is produced? Yes. But do I think it's a little bit ridiculous to expect it to lead the conversation, to be the focus of the New York Times, to be the focus of the Washington Post, when so many other crazy things are happening in the exact context of this same agency, the DOJ we're talking about, the same players like Trump, all these folks? I think it's absurd.
Okay, Lindsay.
This is what's really sad with the state of politics at the end of the day, because these are, if this is true, what this whistleblowing is saying, it is a bombshell and it should be investigated as such. Now, we don't know. This seems like one whistleblower. Is it true or not? That's the job of the media, to investigate these type of things. But oftentimes, because we have so many stories like this, the liberal media blows it off. The right-leaning media eats it up and it becomes huge, opposed to us just being able to see things like you're talking about, Mark. Let's look at this story as it is, but people can't do that. And what Kaivan is just saying, even so, Democrats or Republicans, whatever, if it's on their side, if they're the one being accused, they do not want to talk about it in an insular way. They only want to talk about it like grabbing everything off the shelf, ever bad that has happened. I think that's a disservice to the American people, but it is the state of media affairs right now and politics where we can't see things for what they are. We can only see things for everything that has happened. And that might be a bad answer, but it is the job of the media, maybe not politicians. You can't expect for them to be that, but the media should be able to see a story for what it is and break it apart. That's the job of the media.
Yeah. All right, Joseph, thank you both for that. Joseph, welcome in. If you could unmute, appreciate you being part of this. Tell folks where you are and what's on your mind for our two guests after you unmute. There you go.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on. I'm in upstate New York, and I appreciate the opportunity. Mark, I just wanted to say, and this for everybody listening, the essay you wrote a few days ago called The Trump Revolution is wonderful. And I think in that, you can find the answer to Trump world. Just insert any issue, and you've answered what Trump in his administration, his thinking, how he responds to these issues or creates them or whatever have you. But it was a great essay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's available on my Twitter feed and on my Substack if you want to take a look at it. But thank you for that.
You talk about the media and how they report. Could somebody just let me know, walk me through, how does, like, you write a story or you report on a story and it goes to an editor, I suppose, who then puts their spin on it? How does it get to be so opinionated? It seems to me that nothing is straight down the middle.
Yeah.
There's always, it doesn't matter whether it's the New York Post, the New York Times, USA Today. It's like an opinion piece rather than straight reporting.
Yeah. So great question. I'm going to let Lindsay answer, but I'll just say one thing. The relationship between a TV correspondent and a producer and a newspaper, what we used to call newspaper, writer and their editor, no two are alike, right? So Lindsay's going to do her best to explain sort of in generally how she sees that as happening. But I'll just say, when I get this question, I always start by saying, it's not going to be the same every time. Sometimes you could have a liberal editor and a liberal reporter, and they're in harmony, and sometimes one could be less liberal and it works in a different way. But Lindsay, try to, if you can, explain to Joseph how the process works and yields so much bias.
Yeah, and I would say Mark is probably the best person to answer this question ever, but I'll do my best. Oftentimes, and I haven't been on the reporting side as far as paper or publications, but only for broadcast. Oftentimes in a day, you have a network meeting, which is similar to the one that Mark does every morning with Dan Turrentine and Sean Spicer, where people talk out ideas. How should we be covering this? How should we be talking about this? And then each individual show has an executive producer who oversees the editorial, and they kind of project, here's what we want to talk about today. They work with a booker. Here's the guest we want to have talk about these things. And then they work with the talent. Every talent and every executive producer have a different kind of relationship. So when I had my show with Sean, we acted more like executive producers, and we had the authority within our show to kind of reign supreme editorially. Sometimes we would have the head of the network or senior vice presidents and stuff say, you cannot do this, you need to do this, or you have to cover this way. I've talked to other reporters who have been frustrated with their publication. I just talked to one last week who said every morning he would wake up and essentially, this is the story you have to write and this is the angle you'd have to take. And he would say, well, that's just not true. And they say, well, make it happen, find the story. So oftentimes I say, sometimes it's not what people are telling you, it's what they're not telling you. And I've even had, where you have a guest on, and I've had conservative guests who there's questions I want to ask them, and I'm being told, don't ask them that. You're going to make viewers mad. You're going to make people upset. And, from my standpoint, I'm like, well, shouldn't they be able to respond if this is a big story that's happening? And so this is what happens, or you may never get that guest back. So there's a lot of tug and pull from across the board about what you should do and what you should not do. And even I got a really big guest one time and I got a sit down interview with them, and I ended up having to cancel it, which was terrible because I was told that we were going to lose viewers from this guest, and it just wasn't even worth it. And so these are the kind of things that happen all day long in newsrooms, in publication rooms, and print rooms across the country. And so I would say it's a disservice oftentimes to the American people And that's why sometimes you just have to either go to Mark or try to read across the board so many different outlets, publications, and maybe then you can have a smattering of some of the truth.
Yeah. Kaivan, do you want to weigh in on this?
Mark, do you?
Well, let's see if Kaivan wants to.
No, I mean, my interaction is really as a panelist. So usually they have the Democrat and the Republican. And I do think that, they give us the topics obviously a bit beforehand, and you can kind of tell the way the segment's gonna go based on who the host is, who the guest is. And I think, what's interesting to see is we are in sort of this economy for attention where you go into a certain space, and I think we're seeing a lot of 2028 contenders do this, and the way that you perform in one space is not going to be the way you perform in another, and a lot of times being combative is what's emphasized or interesting. I think we're seeing a lot of trend, as folks go to YouTube, you see a lot of people pushing people that are probably more on the outskirts of both sides to be on air on more traditional mediums and speak to journalists even, because that's who has the attention right now. And I think it's not great for the information ecosystem.
Joseph, by sheer coincidence, I had a half an hour conversation about this topic today and did my reported monologue on my Next Up program on the Megyn Kelly Network. So if you go to that, you can watch it on YouTube or listen to it as a podcast. I talk about it, and then I talk about it with two of the smartest media analysts I've ever met, Drew Holden and Steve Krakauer. So we walked through the exact question you've asked, which is why I'm largely going to defer to my two guests here today. But I recommend that to you because we talk about it in pretty minute detail, focusing particularly on the Washington Post and CNN and how it is that even though it doesn't make any sense as a business, why it is that they're producing so much biased content. So I recommend that to you, and I appreciate you coming in. Grateful to you for the question. Thank you. All right. Let's bring in Jen. Jen, welcome in. Jen is from Oklahoma, as you can see on her. Oops, did the wrong thing there. So now I'm gonna have to fix the problem I just caused. Jen, you'll be here in just a second. Here you go. All right. Here's Jen. Jen, welcome in. Unmute. Tell folks where you are in Oklahoma. What's on your mind for Kaivan and Lindsay?
Well, one of the things I heard reported from the union, I guess, president or whatever for the police in DC. He said his members often, when they responded to a scene and were, sort of writing everything up, often especially depending on what kind of crime it was, a superior would come to the scene and suggest that they kind of write it up as a lesser crime. Like if it was a carjacking, that they should just put it as a theft or that sort of thing. If it was a shooting, just different ways they could sort of restructure the crime so that it wasn't as serious and didn't, apparently, I presume that what was understood is it wouldn't affect the statistics as much. Given stories like that, can we even trust any of the statistics that they say are improving?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, we're doing that same debate on the economic statistics that the Trump administration is challenging. Lindsay, thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jen. I didn't hear his specific comments on that, but I know that this actually was a problem before in DC. And it's something that even Muriel Bowser had talked about fixing, is really actually going after what the crime truly was. And only then are you not going to have repeat offenders and such. And this was just at the last year. So I know that this has been an issue before. I don't know what extent that issue has been. But if that is the case, to your point, it is true. The city is much worse. And I think that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. What are the people feeling? What are people feeling all around the country? Because, I wasn't trying to say don't take the facts, but at the same time, the metric often is how people feel at the end of the day when it comes to elections, when it comes to politics. And we saw that really in 2024 play out in full. So, I think when you walk around the city, that is the tell, and talking to the people who live there. But again, if that really is the case, I think what I would need to figure out is how often is that happening? Is that certain? Are they being told that? Are they being specifically said, this is what you have to do?
I
and then
don't
how many people are actually doing that, right? Like how many police officers are saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to write this as a lower crime. How many are they complying with that request?
Yeah, Kaivan, it's an extraordinary public policy challenge, right? Because most of the government, a lot of the data, I don't know if it's most, but a lot of the data the government puts together, no private entity could match it. You're not going to get your own crime statistics for DC.
Palantir? No.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some economic data is produced by the private sector, and some people think it's superior. But in a case like crime statistics or statistics related to the Pentagon, how do we grapple with that as a public policy challenge?
Well, I think right. I mean, and not to have every answer get back to this, but again, it's back to that bigger picture of why we should cherish our institutions and our trusted institutions that are historically nonpartisan. And I think obviously this administration, but sure, of course, Democrats have made choices in the past to erode that trust as well. And it's so important for this exact reason, right? We need to know the truth about crime. And I think, I guess the next step is one thing we could do is make sure the incentives are aligned so that whatever that incentive may be to write in a lesser crime or whatever isn't there, and therefore we have people chasing the right outcomes and ideally reporting true information and getting appropriately rewarded or more resources, or maybe you have intervention if it's not working out based on credible nonpartisan data. So that's something we should all take much more seriously.
Well, I'm not even suggesting that this is necessarily partisan.
Yeah, no, I wasn't taking that way.
Understood. Jen, thank you. Grateful to you. Jim, welcome in. Thank you for being part of Two Way. Tell folks where you are. What's on your mind for Kaivan and Lindsay?
Hi there. I'm in Montana. Glancing at the chat, by the way, Mark, I noticed some of the teachers earlier were talking about juvenile behaviors in DC, and which reminds me, we need to have that education conversation someday as we get back to school.
Yes, sir.
But my question relates to Ukraine. If you don't want to segue, I respect that because this is
please do.
But I'm really curious why we don't hear more about the kind of similarities between Putin and Trump meeting in Alaska and the Munich agreement in 1938, when the Czechs were just cut out of that whole conversation. It just feels a little bit,
I certainly read comparisons to it, and I'd say there's a lot of differences, and one is the Europeans are central here, right? They're going to talk to the president and vice president tomorrow, and they're not interested in violating the Biden administration view of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So I understand why you're raising it and others have raised it, but I think there's some differences. Kaivan, what's your view about whether the Ukrainians are being, the fact?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. What is, I think, pretty clear difference in approach from this administration and Biden's administration, and I think one of the things about Donald Trump that's been a puzzle is why he does sort of give Putin unlimited chances. Even just a couple of weeks ago, he was sort of coming out saying that he's a bad guy. Finally, the last guy on earth, it seems, to realize that. But I don't think that much is going to happen on Friday. I think, Mark at the outset pretty much called it, that he's going to have a very strong position, Putin, when he gets in there. I also think it's pretty interesting. You hear about this listening exercise. I cannot imagine a Democratic president getting away with saying they're having a listening exercise with a global leader in this conflict that they said they would resolve on day one, and not getting hammered for sounding weak. So I do think, we're talking about the media. I think I see a bit of a double standard there too.
Lindsay.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated situation. And I also think, Jim, if you look at President Trump's relationship with Vladimir Zelensky, it's very complicated as well. I mean, it goes back to his first term and his frustration with him. But I also think you saw that blow up in the Oval Office. And really, you would see him criticize Putin and Zelensky quite often until the minerals deal was accomplished. I think for President Trump, in his mind, that minerals deal really is a picture from his perspective of his unity with Ukraine, and that he's saying, we stand with Ukraine. What more do you need? He's also talked about the great relationship that he has with Putin. You would hear him speak on the campaign trail all the time, this would never happen under my watch if I was president, because he thinks that Putin respects him. I think what he is starting to question, and that's why you have the administration even walking back the seriousness of this summit and saying this is a listening session, is because they don't want to overpromise. He's been overpromising since day one. He said he could end this war in 24 hours after entering the Oval Office, and he hasn't been able to do that. And even the president himself has said, yeah, this has turned out to be more complicated than I even thought. Going to say, I think he'll pick up the phone and have a great conversation with Putin. And then just the next day, he is, lambasting Ukraine and making gains. And he's like, what's happening? So I think even he won't say this publicly because he is a deal maker and he understands that if he criticizes Putin too much, which he has done some, that he thinks it will prevent him from getting the deal he wants or from making the gain. And I also think that it is notable here to show all the work he's been trying to do with peace deals for other countries to show I can do it. See, guys, I can do these deals. I can make peace, because he hasn't been able to be successful with one of the most critical things he thought he could finish. And we even look at what's happening between Israel and Hamas still, a big challenge, two key elements that he said he'd be able to end, and he hasn't been able to. So I think that's why he's been kind of walking it back. To answer your question, Jim, I do think that we're seeing a more unified Europe. You see that with the NATO Secretary General, even now buying weapons from the US to give to Ukraine. It was a huge win. The 5% from NATO, that was something Trump's wanted since his first term. These are all positive gains to show that Europe is in unison, is unified around Ukraine, and I would say, and not Russia. You have Mark Rutte saying consistently that Russia is the concern. And I think as long as you have that, last thing I'll say here, this is something, and when you talk about Trump's overall, idea of how he sees the world should work, he doesn't think that the US should be the savior of the world. He thinks that people should be able to defend themselves. And that's why he's really pushing Europe to defend Ukraine more than the US, even though he supports their defense. And so I just think that's like a different approach than we've seen from someone like Biden, who was wanted to be much more involved on the ground and was criticized for it because people said he didn't give them what they needed to finish it off. So I think that Ukraine is in a much different position now than you're saying there, because you have Europe so unified around them, and even having this meeting tomorrow with Zelensky ahead of it.
Yeah. Jim, thank you. Great question. One more thing I want to cover. My other guest on next up is Harmeet Dillon. She's in one of the most fabled positions any attorney can have in the United States, at least since the 1950s, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. And here she is in my conversation with her about the difference between how the Biden administration and the Trump administration views the office and the issue of civil rights. Number 20, please. Difference in orientation between the Trump Civil Rights Division and the Biden Civil Rights Division.
Well, that's a great question, Mark. And there's a huge difference. There's even a pretty big difference between the first Trump administration and this Trump administration. And so just looking at the Biden side, for the Biden administration has been squarely, and you might call it the third term of the Obama administration. It has been squarely on the far left periphery of radicalism in terms of civil rights. And civil rights has gone from meaning what it meant in 1957 when the Civil Rights Division was first created and the civil rights statutes began to be passed, the modern civil rights statutes. And they were about equality. They were about remedying existing or fairly recent discrimination that provided barriers to access mainly to African Americans and then to women and people with disabilities. What civil rights has come to mean in the modern Democratic Party parlance is a results-oriented system of spoils, really a form of Marxism that guarantees group outcomes, group preferences, and group discrimination against the formerly advantaged people. And to me, that's squarely out of step with both the wording as well as the intent of the civil rights laws and, of course, of our Bill of Rights and Constitution.
Kaivan, I'd love to know what you think about that and how you see this Trump 2.0's conception of civil rights.
Well, I think like everything else we've seen from this administration, they are going to use power. And maybe that's a mistake that Democrats make, is they don't always use power when they have it. But you look at what's happening, for example, on college campuses, and again, they're trying to choose who succeeds and who fails, and taking that out of the hands of independent decision makers who have their own criteria. For example, I would say I spent a lot of time in higher education. The selection process that's deemed affirmative action, I think, is actually totally misrepresented by this conversation, where a school should be allowed to, for example, say, I want the most impressive people. And I define that by where did you start and where did you end up? Because that's how impressive you are. If you already started at the finish line, it's not discriminating against anyone to say it's not that impressive that you made it across the finish line. You started at the finish line. So I think, everyone can weaponize this, as we're seeing, to their advantage. I think what's happening on campuses is really disappointing, and it's chilling to free speech. And it's surprising to see so many people on the right, who were these self-anointed free speech warriors, stay quiet about all this stuff.
Okay, right now you can turn over to Michael Moynihan, the Moynihan Report. Watch Michael's conversation. It's a recorded conversation, so you can watch it on YouTube about the Karen Reed case with Aiden Turtleboy Kearney. Watch that now. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Dan, Sean, and I will be back with the morning meeting. And as I said, next up is available now, my conversations about the media and how they're dealing with liberal bias in their business models, and then my conversation with the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. Really grateful to both Kaivan and Lindsay for coming back. Hope you two will come back again. Grateful to all of you for being part of the two-way community. And again, I'll see you at 9 a.m. Thanks so much.